Jack was buried in a sealed coffin 5 years ago. But tonight he's standing on my front porch, knocking with that familiar clack-clack-clack rhythm, only his fingernails are as black as coal and cracked like broken porcelain. The wind in Nebraska is unlike anywhere else. It doesn't just blow through, it screams. It carries dust from the barren wastelands to the west, carries the scent of dried corn stalks, and sometimes carries things that should have stayed buried. I am Elias Vance. 3 generations of my family have clung to this god-forsaken farm, 30 miles down a muddy red dirt road from the nearest town. Farming here is a persistent battle against loneliness. But ever since the blizzard of 19, the night I lost Jack, that loneliness turned into a life sentence without bars. I live alone, eat alone, and mutter to the ancient corn stalks in the field just to make sure I haven't forgotten how to pronounce words. Tonight, a storm is coming. The wooden planks of the old house groan under the pressure of the gale. The fluorescent light in the kitchen flickers continuously, creating a zay sound that strains the nerves in my brain like guitar strings. I sit at the dining table, facing a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey and a meticulously oiled Winchester 1897 hunting rifle. It's not that I'm afraid of thieves. Out here in the middle of nowhere, thieves are more afraid of getting lost than of the homeowner. I'm afraid of what my own mind draws up in the darkness. The wall clock strikes 11 p.m. The chime no sooner fades than another sound breaks the silence. Clack, clack, clack. 3 dry knocks. Clear, deliberate. I freeze, my glass suspended in midair. The wind outside is howling like a devil, but that knocking cuts through everything, sharp and distinct. No branch could strike with that rhythm. Clack, 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 louder this time. It came from the front door, the thick oak door I had triple bolted since sunset. Who's there? I called out, my voice hoarse from whiskey and cigarettes. My hand unconsciously slid down to the cold gunstock. Silence. Only the wind whistling through the window crack. I stood up, the wooden floor squeaking ket under my feet, a sound I was sick of hearing. I walked slowly into the hallway, barrel pointed down at the floor but my finger already on the trigger. Maybe a truck driver with a broken-down vehicle, or the sheriff doing a storm patrol, but no one patrols in this hellish weather. The logic in my head tried to find a rational explanation, while my gut twisted with a primal, irrational fear. I peered through the peephole on the door. Outside was pitch black. Only the yellowish light from the porch cast a weak glow onto a small, muddy yard. And standing right in the middle of that faint pool of light was a figure. The person was wearing a moss-green puffer coat, the kind of heavy one used for the harsh winter. The hood was pulled low, obscuring the face, with rain streaming down from the brim onto the shoulders. I squinted. That coat. I knew that coat. A bolt of lightning tore across the night sky, its blinding white light illuminating the yard for an instant. In that brief moment, the person outside lifted their head. My heart seemed to stop. My lungs compressed, unable to take a breath. It was Jack. Jack Miller. My best friend, my sworn brother. The man whose coffin I had personally helped carry down into the grave at St. Jude Cemetery 5 years ago. I backed away, stumbling against the coat rack, nearly dropping the gun. "No way," I whispered, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "You're drunk, Elias. You're completely wasted." But the knocking sounded a third time. Clack, clack, clack. This time, a voice spoke from the other side of the door. A deep, hollow voice, sounding as if it came from the bottom of a dry well, echoing through the thick wood. "Elias, open up. It's cold." It was Jack's voice, but it was wrong. It lacked resonance, lacked warmth. It sounded flat, like an old, scratchy tape recording, or like the wind whistling through a hollow pipe. My reason screamed at me to back away, to shoot through the door, to run upstairs and hide. But emotion, the guilt that had weighed on me for 5 years, won. I rushed forward, yanked open the 3 bolts, and threw the oak door wide. The cold wind rushed in, hitting my face, bringing with it the freezing rain. Jack stood there, an arm's length away from me. He looked exactly the same as the last day I saw him alive. Still the square face, the slightly hooded blue eyes, and the small scar near his temple from a tractor accident when he was a kid. But as I looked closer, under the flickering porch light, I began to notice details that churned my stomach. Jack's skin was pale, not the paleness of someone cold, but the grayish white of old candle wax, turning a dull yellow in the areas around his neck and ears. His facial skin was unusually taut, glistening, poreless, as if someone had stretched a plastic membrane over his skull. "Jack?" I stammered. "Is that really you?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head to one side. A jerky movement. Crack. The sound of his neck bones was dry, more like breaking a dry stick than the smooth movement of a joint. "It's me, Elias," Jack said. His lips moved, but the movement seemed a beat slower than the sound that came out. Like a movie with desynchronized audio. "I'm home." He held out his hand, intending to place it on my shoulder. That's when I saw the hand. Long, stiff fingers. Fingernails pitch black, not from dirt, but as if the flesh underneath had completely necrosed, turned to coal. The cuticle around the nail was peeling, revealing raw, red tissue, but absolutely no blood was flowing. And at his wrist, where the coat sleeve was slightly pulled up, I caught a glimpse of a thin black thread running across, deeply embedded in the flesh. But the most horrific thing was not visual. It was olfactory. As Jack stepped closer, a smell hit my nose directly, overpowering the scent of the rainstorm. It wasn't strong enough to make one vomit immediately, but it crept in, winding around my nasal passages. It was the smell of freshly dug damp earth, the distinctive smell of a cemetery after the rain. Mixed in with that was the acrid smell of industrial bleach, the kind used to scrub morgue floors, and something sickly sweet. The smell of beginning to decompose meat that had been refrigerated. You're soaked," I said, trying to ignore the smell, trying to cling to normal reality. "Come inside. Come on in." Jack stepped over the threshold. His movement sent chills down my spine. He didn't walk like a normal person, shifting weight from heel to toe. Jack lifted his entire foot and placed it down with a thud, his whole body rigid like a wooden puppet with a jammed hip joint. Each step let out a thick, thick. The coat sound was like coarse fabric rubbing together, or dry skin rubbing against bone. He walked straight into the living room, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor, forming dark puddles, murky like sewage water, not clear like rain. Jack sat down in my father's old armchair. He didn't sit down comfortably. He folded, knees bent, hips bent, back perfectly vertical at 90 degrees, hands placed parallel on his thighs, a perfectly inhuman sitting posture. I closed the door, fumbling with the lock. When I turned back, I saw Jack staring at me. His eyes weren't blinking. Since he walked in, I swear he hadn't blinked once. The pupils were fully dilated, black, reflecting my distorted image holding the gun. "Long time no see, Elias," Jack said, his voice still monotonous, devoid of emotion. "The house is the same. Still. Quiet." I swallowed, my throat feeling dry as if I had swallowed sand. "It's been 5 years, Jack. Everyone said you were dead. I saw your body." The corner of Jack's mouth twitched slightly. Just a little, but it didn't involve his facial muscles or the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. Only the skin at the edge of his lips was pulled up, revealing perfectly white, even teeth that were dry and without a drop of saliva. "Death is just a state, Elias," Jack whispered, and this time, I clearly heard another sound mixed in with his voice. A tiny whistling sound, like metal lightly scratching glass. Or maybe, I never really left. I just needed to be fixed a little. Outside, another lightning bolt struck, the booming thunder shaking the entire house. The lights went out. In the engulfing darkness, I couldn't see Jack anymore, but I smelled that combination of earth and bleach more intensely than ever, right next to me, and I heard a faint sound of tearing fabric. Rhett. When I offered the coffee cup, Jack smiled to thank me, but only the skin at the corner of his lips pulled up, while his eyes remained wide open, staring through my chest. The darkness in the living room was thick, heavy, as if someone had poured molten lead into the space. In that blinding moment, my sight was stripped away, but my hearing and smell became agonizingly acute. The Rhett sound just now wasn't the sound of tearing paper, nor ordinary clothing fabric. It sounded like dry tissue being pulled apart, or the sound of old adhesive tape being forcefully peeled from a cardboard surface. "Jack?" I called out, my voice faint. I fumbled in my pocket, my hand shaking as I pulled out my Zippo lighter. Touch. Foot. The small orange flame erupted, dancing wildly because of the wind whistling through the window crack. The weak light flickered against the wall, creating long, distorted shadows. Jack was still sitting there. He hadn't moved a millimeter since the lights went out. He sat still as a stone, or rather, like a wax statue forgotten in a museum's archives. His head was slightly bowed, his hands still perfectly parallel on his thighs in a bizarre manner. And then, the power came back on. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling made a tan-talk sound and then burst into brightness, chasing away the darkness and the ghostly dimness of the Zippo flame. The room returned to its normal state. Peeling wallpaper, dusty liquor cabinet, and a threadbare Turkish rug. But Jack's presence was anything but normal. Under the cold white light, his skin looked even more artificial. It lacked the translucency of living human skin, the healthy pink glow from circulating blood underneath. Jack's skin was opaque, thick, and at his neck, I swear I saw folds of skin that didn't move rhythmically with breathing. Wait a minute. Breathing. I stared at Jack's chest. His chest was flat, no rise and fall, no up and down rhythm. Aren't you cold? I asked, trying to find a normal topic to cling to avoid going insane. Let me make something hot. Jack slowly lifted his head. That movement, once again, sent goosebumps down my neck. It wasn't smooth. His neck jerked in small increments. Kook, 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 then stopped when his eyes met mine. Coffee, Jack said. A single word, no inflection. I rushed back into the kitchen, relieved to have an excuse to escape that gaze, if only for a few minutes. My hands shook as I scooped coffee grounds into the filter. The boiling water hissed. The aroma of burnt coffee beans spread, partially masking that damn damp and chemical smell. I reassured myself. It's Jack. It's a miracle. Maybe he was injured, suffered a brain trauma, lost his memory, and wandered somewhere for the past 5 years. You must not be afraid of your friend, Elias. I poured 2 steaming black coffees, then returned to the living room. Jack was still sitting in the same posture. Even the wrinkles on his clothes hadn't changed. Here you go. I placed the ceramic cup on the coffee table in front of Jack. Be careful. It's hot. Jack looked at the cup. His right arm began to move. It was a painful process to watch. First, his shoulder raised abnormally high, as if the shoulder joint was dislocated from its socket. Then, his forearm swung forward, stiff as a wooden plank. His hand splayed out, fingers contracting one joint at a time, clack, 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 until it clamped tightly onto the cup handle. He lifted the cup. There was no muscular fluidity, only brute mechanical force. The ceramic cup hit his teeth with a loud clop. But Jack didn't drink. He just held the cup level with his mouth, steam wafting onto his face. And that's when I saw the first smile. Thank you, Elias, he said. Jack's mouth muscles began to work, but it didn't resemble any smile I had ever seen in my life. In a normal person, a genuine smile starts from the eyes. The orbicularis oculi muscles contract to create crow's feet, and only then do the cheekbones pull the corners of the mouth up. But with Jack, his eyes were completely still. The eye sockets were wide open, pupils fully dilated, pitch black and empty like 2 holes drilled into the void. Only the mouth moved. The corners of his lips were pulled up sharply, suddenly. It wasn't a contraction of muscle tissue. It looked as if 2 invisible wires were hooked to the corners of his mouth, and someone inside his skull was yanking them hard. His upper lip was stretched so taut that it exposed his entirely gray gums. The skin around his mouth stretched out, thin, and I saw faint blue lines surfacing under that waxy skin. But they weren't blood vessels. They were black and rigid, like electrical wires or thick suture threads. That smile hung on his face, rigid, soulless, completely mechanical. It was like the way a cheap plastic doll is molded with a permanent smile, but much more terrifying because it was present on the face of a man whose every expression I once knew. What are you smiling about? I asked, my voice trembling, a cold sensation running down my spine. Jack didn't answer right away. He maintained that twisted smile, then tilted his head to the left. Again, the dry sound of bone grating. Happy, he replied, the sound not matching his widely smiling mouth shape. To be home. Very happy. Suddenly, Jack's hand holding the coffee cup convulsed. It wasn't a tremor due to Parkinson's or cold. It was a sharp, unnatural jerk, like a short circuit running through a wiring system. The hot coffee cup slipped from his stiff fingers, falling onto Jack's lap. Smash. The cup shattered on the floor. Hot, black coffee splashed directly onto Jack's jeans and bare hand. "Damn it!" I yelled, instinctively rushing forward to grab a napkin off the table to help him. "Are you okay? That's boiling hot." But Jack didn't flinch. He didn't startle, didn't withdraw his hand, didn't wince. There was no pain reflex whatsoever from a living creature. He still maintained that mechanical smile, looking down at the spreading puddle of coffee on the floor with detached curiosity. I froze when my hand touched his to wipe the water. Cold. Bone-chilling cold, as if touching a frozen slab of meat just pulled out of the freezer. But the horrifying thing was the texture of the skin. It was slick. The coffee didn't soak into the skin, nor did it turn red from the burn. It slid across the surface of his hand like water on a taro leaf, or rather, like sliding over a layer of candle wax. I vigorously rubbed the napkin on Jack's hand, and his skin shifted. That's right, the layer of skin on the back of his hand slid under the pressure of the napkin, separating from the flesh, or whatever it was underneath, wrinkling up like a loose rubber glove being worn on a skinny hand. I recoiled, pulling my hand back, dropping the napkin. "Your skin," I stammered, my eyes wide with horror. "What's wrong with your skin?" Jack slowly turned his face to look at me. The smile on his lips descended, not gradually fading, but snapping shut abruptly, returning to its initial state of apathy. He brought his other hand up, smoothing the wrinkled skin on the back of his right hand. He smoothed it back out, pressing the edges lightly like a craftsman re-gluing wallpaper. "A bit loose," Jack said, his voice even, as if commenting on a bolt that wasn't tightened enough. "Didn't get time to stitch it back up. Sorry, stitch. Stitch it back up?" My head spun. That word hammered in my mind. "What the hell are you talking about, Jack?" Jack stood up. His movement of standing up was equally bizarre. He didn't use his hands for support, didn't gather momentum. He simply straightened his knee and hip joints simultaneously, his body pushed upward as if lifted by hydraulic pistons. He was taller than I remembered. Or was it because I was shrinking in fear? "I'm tired, Elias," Jack said, ignoring my question. He walked toward the staircase leading to the second floor, where his old bedroom was. "I need to rest. This body needs time to adapt." He walked. The sound of his footsteps thick, quiet, thick echoing on the wooden floor. As Jack stepped onto the first stair, I stood paralyzed in the living room, watching his back. His moss-green puffer coat was still drenched, and right at the back of his neck, where the collar sagged, under the bright fluorescent light, I saw it. A long incision, a brutal cut running from his hairline down to his cervical vertebrae, clumsily stitched back together with thick, coarse, black twine, like fishing line. The stitches were uneven. Some parts were pulled tight, wrinkling the skin. Others were loose, revealing a dark gap underneath the skin. And from that gap, a pale yellow, viscous liquid, like beef tallow, was oozing out, dripping onto his collar. Jack stopped, as if sensing my gaze. He didn't turn his head, but his stiff neck made a cracking sound, and I saw the skin on the back of his neck tighten. "Don't stay up too late, Elias," his voice echoed back, but the sound didn't seem to come from his mouth. It resonated from his hollow chest. "Tonight is long." Jack continued upstairs, the darkness swallowing him at the turn of the stairs. I stood alone in the brightly lit living room, the smell of damp earth and bleach enveloping the space. And from upstairs, the sound of Jack's old bedroom door closing. Clack, followed by the squeak of bed springs. And another sound, the sound of metal clanking. Clink, clink, like someone arranging a set of surgical instruments. I found a clump of Jack's hair on the pillow, but when I picked it up, I realized the hair roots weren't white follicles, but tiny knots of suture thread deeply embedded in the scalp. I woke up when the bright Nebraska midday sun shone through the window curtain, stabbing into my eyes. My neck ached from sleeping hunched in the armchair, the Winchester rifle still resting in my lap, cold and heavy. For a brief second, I allowed myself to hope. It was just a dream, I told myself. You drank too much, Elias. You missed Jack so much your brain invented a horror play. But then I looked down at the floor. The coffee stain from last night was still there on the Turkish rug. It had dried into a dark brown, stiff patch, looking more like old blood than coffee. And next to the puddle, a small, opaque white piece of skin lay alone. It was the piece of Jack's hand skin that had peeled off when I tried to wipe him. It curled up under the sunlight, looking like a fragment of dry onion peel. Not a dream. He was here. The house was eerily silent. No snoring, no footsteps, no running water in the bathroom. This silence was thick, pressing down on my eardrums. I stood up, my joints cracking. I needed to check the livestock. That was the only excuse I could think of to get out of the house, to breathe air without that smell of bleach and rotten meat. I opened the back door and stepped outside. The storm from last night had passed, leaving a cloudless blue sky. The endless cornfields rustled in the gentle breeze. But something was wrong. Normally, by now, my hunting dogs, Buster and Duke, would have rushed out, tails wagging wildly, demanding food. Buster was an old sheepdog mix, brave enough to face off against coyotes. But today, the backyard was deserted. Buster! Duke! I called, my whistle echoing into the air. No answer, only the sound of the wind whistling through the wooden fence slats. I walked toward the doghouse near the edge of the woods. As I got closer, I heard strange sounds. A desperate, fear-filled whimpering ooh. Buster and Duke were huddled in the furthest corner of the kennel. They were shaking violently, pressed together into a trembling mass of fur. When they saw me, Buster didn't show joy. He bared his teeth, his bloodshot eyes panicked, growling in his throat as if I were a threat. "Hey, it's me," I said softly, reaching out to pet him. Bark. Buster let out a horrified bark and bolted past me, running frantically toward the cornfield. Duke followed, tail tucked tight between his legs, yelping mournfully as if chased by a ghost. They ran straight, without looking back, disappearing into the corn rows taller than a man. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of the smell clinging to me. The smell of that thing in the house. Nature has a sixth sense that humans have lost. The animals know. They know that Returnee doesn't belong to this world. I stood rooted to the spot in the yard, a chill running down my spine even though the sun was blazing hot on my face. I turned back to look at the house. From the second-floor window, Jack's bedroom, the curtain was slightly ajar. I had the feeling someone was standing behind that curtain, watching me. No, not watching, but studying. I had to know the truth. I walked around to the front, but instead of going inside, I decided to check Jack's window from the outside. I leaned the old aluminum ladder against the wooden wall, climbing up very quietly. My heart thumped wildly in my chest. I peeked my head over the windowsill, squinting through the gap in the curtain. The room was empty. The bed was still flat, with no signs that anyone had slept on it. Jack's luggage, if he had any, was nowhere to be seen. But on the old desk in the corner of the room, I saw something glistening under the sunlight. A set of tools. Not a razor or a comb. They were needles. Curved, semicircular needles used in surgery or for sewing burlap sacks, shining brightly silver. Next to them was a large spool of black thread and a pair of pliers. Why would Jack need pliers? I climbed down the ladder, determined to face the fear. I went inside, walking up the creaking wooden stairs. The higher I went, the stronger the acrid smell became. It was like the smell of the high school biology lab, where they soaked frogs in formaldehyde. Jack's bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it gently. Jack. No one was there. The bathroom door inside was wide open, also empty. Where did he go? I stepped into the room. The air in here was at least 5 degrees colder than the hallway. It felt like stepping into a refrigerator. I walked toward the bed, looking from outside. I thought it was flat. But up close, I saw a slight indentation on the pillow. Not the indentation of a head sleeping all night, but more like someone had placed a heavy spherical object on it for a moment. And right in the middle of that indentation was a clump of black hair. I frowned. Hair falling out is normal, but this amount was a bit much. It looked more like a patch of hair had been ripped out than naturally shed. I leaned down, pinching the clump of hair with my fingers. The sensation of touching it was strange. Jack's hair used to be soft and slightly curly. This was coarse, stiff as fishing line, and artificially jet black, without any natural sheen. I brought it close to my eyes to examine it under the window light. My stomach clenched. A wave of nausea rose up my throat, acrid. At the base of the hair strands, Where small, opaque white follicles or hair roots should have been, were knots. Each hair strand was tied with a tiny, delicate knot at the end, and clinging to these knots were small, grayish-white, dry fragments of flesh. This was not hair growing from a scalp. This was hair that had been stitched in. Someone, or something, had meticulously threaded each hair strand through the skin, then tied a knot underneath the epidermis to hold it in place, like how people make hair for cheap cloth dolls. And now, that skin was decaying, causing these knots to come loose. I threw the clump of hair onto the floor as if it were a poisonous spider. My hands trembled as I wiped them hard on my jeans, trying to erase that chilling, rough sensation. Suddenly, I heard a sound. Clack, clack, swoosh. The sound came from downstairs, from the storage room connected to the kitchen. I pulled the pistol from my waistband. I had swapped the hunting rifle for the handgun for easier movement in the house. I crept out of the room, descending the stairs. The sound grew clearer with each step. It was the sound of metal colliding, steady, rhythmic. And mixed in with it was a faint humming, a discordant, distorted melody. Jack was singing, or something was using Jack's vocal cords to produce a sound similar to singing. I peeked through the kitchen door toward the backyard, where the tool shed entrance was. The shed door was wide open. Jack was sitting there, on a wooden stool, with his back to me. He was shirtless. The sight that met my eyes made me cover my mouth to keep from screaming. Jack's back was a map of patchwork. His back skin was not a single, continuous piece. It was stitched together from at least 4 different patches of skin. There was a pale patch, a patch dark from sunburn, a hairy patch, and a smooth, slick patch. They were sewn together with a chaotic, brutal network of threads. Herringbone stitch, overcast stitch, running stitch, all kinds of stitches overlapping each other. In the middle of his back, his spine protruded, grotesquely bumpy. It seemed those vertebrae were too large for the skin layer covering them, causing the skin to stretch so taut it was almost transparent. Jack was doing something to his left arm. He held a curved needle, the one I had seen on the desk earlier, and plunged it through the skin on his bicep. Thud. He pulled the black thread through the flesh. No blood flowed out. Only a stream of yellow fluid oozed from the needle hole. Jack pulled the thread tight. Rote. The sound of thread rubbing through dry flesh was chilling. He was stitching his bicep back together, where the joint between his shoulder and arm seemed to be coming loose. While stitching, he swayed his rigid head, mumbling the old nursery rhyme we used to sing as kids. But the lyrics had been changed. Stitch the arm, mend the leg, needle through flesh, thread through tendon. Your skin, my bone. Put it on for warmth, fear no burning wind. Jack. I couldn't hold back any longer, uttering his name. Jack stopped. The needle was still halfway embedded in his bicep. He slowly rotated on the stool. That rotation was horrific. His hips didn't move. Only his upper body rotated 180 degrees. His spine made a loud crack, like snapping a sugarcane stalk. His face turned to confront me while his legs still faced the workbench. In the daylight, that face looked even more wrong. One side of his cheek was slightly sunken, like melted candle wax. His left eye was shut, not because the eyelid was closed, but because the 2 eyelids had been stitched together with 2 small threads. Elias, Jack said, smiling. This time the smile was wider, revealing his teeth. Too many teeth. I swear I saw 2 rows of teeth crowded together in his mouth. You see, old things tend to break down. I'm having to reinforce it. He raised his left arm, where the black thread was still dangling with the needle. Do you want to help me? Jack asked, his tone terrifyingly innocent. The spot on my back shoulder. My hand can't reach it. It keeps coming loose. He stood up, walking toward me. His lower body jerked and rotated to align with his upper body. The flop-flop sound of loose flesh colliding was distinctly audible. Just 1 stitch, Elias. Just 1 stitch. I backed away, hitting the edge of the kitchen doorway. The gun in my hand felt heavy, but my finger couldn't pull the trigger. It was still Jack's face, Jack's voice. Despite being distorted, despite being disgusting, it was still my best friend. Don't come any closer, I yelled. What's wrong? Jack tilted his head, causing his loose neck to fold down at an absurd angle, almost touching his shoulder. Are you afraid? Do you hate me? Suddenly, the The skin on Jack's right cheek, at the cheekbone, burst open. A small tear appeared spontaneously, like rotted fabric stretched too far. From that tear, not blood, but a black beetle crawled out, dropping flop onto the floor, then quickly scurrying into the gap between the floorboards. Jack raised his hand to touch the tear, his expression calm as if he had just been bitten by a mosquito. Oh, he clicked his tongue. Tore again. I need more thread. And I need new skin. This skin is too old. His eyes fixed on my bare arm, with its tanned, healthy, and pink skin of life. Your skin looks nice, Elias. Jack told an old joke about skeletons in the closet. Then he laughed so hard that the corner of his mouth ripped open to his ear, but there was no blood, only the sound of burlap being torn apart. Stop! I roared, pointing the pistol straight at Jack's chest, or whatever was wearing his skin. My hand was drenched in sweat, slipping on the plastic gun grip. Jack stopped at the kitchen doorway, his semi-naked body, speckled with patchwork skin, standing tall, blocking the light. He tilted his head, looking at the gun, then at me with feigned disappointment. Guns, Elias? Jack sighed. His chest didn't rise and fall, but the sound still came out. We swore we'd never point a gun at each other. Have you forgotten? That night in the deer-hunting woods in 2015, he was rummaging through Jack's memories. He had everything Jack had. This twisted my gut, hurting more than the fear. You are not Jack. My voice trembled but was firm. Jack is dead. I buried him. I saw his face turn purple in the coffin. Jack took one more step. The sound of bare feet hitting the wooden floor was a heavy, damp bope, bope. You buried the shell, Jack said, his voice beginning to distort, fluctuating like a radio signal with interference. But you couldn't bury the will, Elias. The will to live. It's strong. It called the workers. And they came. Who? Who came? I backed away, hitting my hip against the dining table. The weavers of shattered dreams. Jack smiled. That smile again. But this time, it didn't stop at a mechanical level. It began to widen. He continued to advance, cornering me. The stench from his naked body was no longer shielded by clothing. It hit me squarely in the face. The sickly sweet smell of rotting flesh mixed with rusty metal and old dust. Do you remember the joke about the skeleton, Elias? Jack abruptly changed the subject, his black eyes wide and staring. Why didn't the skeleton go to the party? I was silent, my index finger tightening on the trigger until it was white. I was about to shoot. I swore I was about to shoot, because it didn't have the body to go. Jack answered himself, then burst into laughter. It was a wild, jarring cackle. Ha 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 ha. A breathless laugh, without the vibration of vocal cords. It sounded like two pieces of polystyrene foam rubbing together. And then, it happened. Jack laughed too loudly. He opened his mouth too wide. His dry lips, thin as tissue paper, couldn't withstand the tension. YT. The sound was so loud it made me shudder. The left corner of Jack's mouth ripped open. The tear ran from the edge of his lip, slicing through his cheek, extending all the way to his earlobe. Instinctively, I closed my eyes, expecting a gush of blood. But no, not a single drop of blood. I opened my eyes, and the sight before me almost made me drop the gun. Jack's face was now split into two halves, dangling. The wide-open tear revealed the inside. There was no red flesh, no jaw muscle, no salivary glands. Beneath that thin layer of facial skin were layers of gray, moldy cotton wool, the kind used to stuff cheap plush toys or as insulation in old house walls. Mixed in with the moldy cotton were yellowish straw fibers and, most horrifyingly, plump maggots wriggling, burrowing in the pile of cotton. Jack's teeth, the only things that seemed to be real bone, were held tightly to his skull by rusty wire wrapped around the roots. When he laughed, the wire tautened, preventing the jawbone from falling off. Oops. Jack stopped laughing. He raised his hand to touch the gaping tear on his cheek. His finger poked straight into the cotton inside, pulling out a clump of gray cotton wool sticky with yellowish slimy fluid. It's torn. His voice was now completely distorted, because one side of his cheek was no longer sealed to create sound resonance. The voice escaped with a hiss through the hole in his cheek, sounding like wind whistling through a cave. The quality of the skin is poor lately." He looked at the clump of cotton in his hand, then at me. One half of his face still held the rigid smile, the other half was ripped open, dangling like a piece of excess flesh. "Do you have a needle, Elias?" he asked, his tone changing. It was no longer Jack's voice. It was deep, hoarse, and ancient. The voice of something ancient. "I need to stitch it back. Right now." "What the hell are you?" I screamed, tears streaming down my face from fear and disgust. "I am the seamster," the entity replied. It stepped forward, raising its hand with long, slender fingers toward me. "And I see you have very good parts. Those eyes. Those tendons in your legs. They are very durable." Bang! I pulled the trigger. The gunshot roared deafeningly in the confined space. The 9mm bullet slammed straight into the middle of Jack's bare chest. The impact caused his body to jerk backwards slightly. A small hole appeared in his chest, where his heart should have been, but no blood sprayed out. Instead, a cloud of fine dust rose from the bullet hole, dust of dry cotton and mold. Jack looked down at the bullet hole in his chest. He poked his finger into it, wiggling it around as if checking a torn pocket. So crude. "Elias." He looked up at me. This time, anger was clearly visible on his deformed face. "It's a waste to damage the skin." He lunged at me. His speed was inhuman. He didn't run with muscles. He launched forward like a giant spider, arms and legs flailing wildly. I panicked, pulling the trigger repeatedly. Bang, bang, bang. The second bullet hit his shoulder, tearing away a patch of skin. The third bullet hit his neck, breaking a few stitches, causing his head to flop loosely to one side. But he didn't stop. The feeling of pain seemed non-existent to this creature. I turned and ran. I dashed out of the kitchen, running frantically toward the front door. The bope-bope of bare feet and the clink-clack of bones colliding were right behind me. "Don't run, Elias!" The voice boomed, hoarse, echoing from everywhere in the house. "Let me take your measurements. It'll fit perfectly. It'll be beautiful." I rushed to the main door, but it was locked tight, not by the bolt I had locked, but by black threads. Hundreds of thick, jet-black threads had sprouted from the doorframe, crisscrossing, blocking the exit like a giant spiderweb made of wire. I turned back. Jack was standing at the foot of the stairs. His head was flopped onto one shoulder, his ripped-open mouth grinned widely, revealing the wriggling cotton wool inside. His hand held a rusty pair of shears. I don't know where he got it. "Dead end, old friend," he said, raising the shears, the two blades clanking tatch, tatch, tatch to the rhythm of a lullaby. I looked around in desperation. The living room window. I lunged for it, slamming the gun butt against the glass. Crash. The glass shattered. I didn't care about the sharp shards cutting into my skin. I scrambled through the window frame, landing with a thud on the muddy ground outside. I scrambled to my feet, running for my life toward the machinery shed. The only place I could find a weapon stronger than that useless handgun. But as I ran across the yard, I heard a swoosh. Swoosh. From the cornfield. The scarecrows. I had set up 3 scarecrows around the cornfield last week to chase away crows. Under the dim moon just emerging, I saw one scarecrow turning its head to look at me. It was no longer stuffed with straw. Beneath its old shirt, I saw the movement of muscles, and on the burlap sack face, crudely drawn with charcoal, a real mouth was slowly opening. I didn't dare stop. I rushed into the large shed, slamming the metal door shut and bolting it. I leaned my back against the door, panting, my heart pounding as if it would burst from my chest. In the darkness of the shed, the smell of machine oil and old straw helped me calm down a little. But then, a sound echoed from the darkest corner of the shed, the place where I kept my mother's old industrial sewing machine, the machine that had been broken for 10 years. Thump, 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 the sound of the sewing machine pedal running. The machine needle hammered up and down frantically. Clack, 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 clack. I turned on my flashlight, shining it toward that corner. The sewing machine was running by itself, but there was no fabric under the presser foot. Instead, a long strip of human skin was being fed through the machine, and the needle was diligently stitching, crisscrossing black threads onto it. And that strip of skin had a faded anchor tattoo. That was the tattoo on my father's bicep, the man who died 3 years ago. I thought the clanking was due to old water pipes, until I saw my shadow holding a needle and thread, and on the sewing table, A strip of human skin with a familiar tattoo was being edged with zigzag stitches. The sewing machine suddenly stopped the moment my flashlight beam swept over it. A deadly silence descended on the shed, heavier than the previous noise. Dust in the air danced in the faint yellow light, but what captured all my attention was the machine in the corner of the room. It was an antique Singer sewing machine, the treadle-operated kind my mother used to sew clothes for the whole family in the 80s. Its glossy black paint was peeling, revealing the rusted cast iron underneath. But the needle was gleaming, brand new, razor sharp, and lying under the presser foot of the sewing machine wasn't fabric. It was skin. A long, narrow strip of skin, dark brown, looking tough and rough. It was neatly trimmed, the outer edge overcast with thick black thread. I walked closer, my steps unsteady with fear, but a morbid curiosity pulled me. I shone the flashlight onto the strip of skin. In the middle of the wrinkled skin, a faint, indigo-colored tattoo appeared, an anchor with the words, U.S. Navy. My knees buckled. That was the tattoo on my father's right bicep. He had died of lung cancer 3 years ago. I had buried him next to Mom's grave at St. Jude Church Cemetery, 30 miles away. No way, I groaned, the acidic taste of stomach bile rising in my throat. Dad, why was it here? I trembled as I reached out to touch the strip of skin. It was cold, but not hard. It was soft, tough, and elastic, as if it had been thoroughly tanned with chemicals. I swept the flashlight beam further away, lighting up the rotten wooden shelves behind the sewing machine. In that moment, I realized this shed was no longer a place for storing tractors or farm tools. It was a workshop. A hellish factory. On the iron hooks originally used to hang chains and scythes, now hung dangling outfits. But they weren't clothes made of fabric. They were human skins. Some were intact, skillfully peeled off like skinning a rabbit, a single incision from the neck down to the groin. The arm and leg openings hung down like empty carcasses. Some were patchwork skins, pieced together from different colored fragments, white, black, yellow, red, forming a gruesome tapestry of flesh. The stench in here was so strong I had to cover my nose with my shirt. The smell of formaldehyde, the smell of bleach, the smell of improperly tanned leather, and the rancid smell of stale fat. On a large wooden table in the middle of the room, I saw old glass jars that used to hold pickled cucumbers, now filled with other things. One jar was filled with human eyes. The dull eyes floated in a yellow solution, pupils dilated, staring out into the void. Another jar contained teeth, incisors, molars, canines, hundreds of white teeth piled up, and the most horrific were the large burlap sacks stacked in the corner. One sack was torn, revealing its contents. Cotton wool stained with dried blood, straw, and human hair. A lot of hair. My God. I backed away, hitting the sewing machine pedal. Clack. This was why Jack returned. This was why the dog Buster was terrified. We weren't just being invaded, we were being harvested. That entity, the Nightmare Weaver, or whatever damn name it called itself, wasn't just possessing corpses, it was grave robbing. It took the old bodies, skinned them, removed the bones, stuffed them with cotton, and turned them into puppets. It was building a family from the fragments of the dead. Ket. The metal door of the shed behind me screeched. I whirled around, raising the flashlight and the pistol. Jack was standing at the door. Or rather, what was left of Jack. My bullets earlier had caused significant damage. A large patch of skin on his chest was ripped open by the gunshot, exposing the rib cage made of curved oak sticks and the moldy black cotton stuffing inside. His head, already loose, was now completely folded onto his right shoulder, held only by a few artificial muscle tendons. He didn't rush to attack. He stepped in slowly, closing the door behind him, then bolting it. "You found my workshop," Jack said. Because his throat was damaged, the voice now came from his abdomen, a deep, muffled nasal sound like someone speaking in a ceramic jar. "A bit messy, isn't it? I haven't had time to clean up after last week's harvest." "You dug up my dad's grave," I hissed through clenched teeth, anger temporarily overwhelming fear. "You skinned him." Jack walked to the wooden table, picked up a jar of eyes, and gently shook it, examining the contents. "He had very good skin, Elias. Weathered, very durable. Suitable for lining the high-stress joints," Jack explained, his tone as professional as a tailor discussing silk fabric. "And yours. Your skin is softer, more elastic. I plan to use your skin for a mask, a new face for the coming winter." "Why?" I yelled. "Why us?" Jack put the jar down. He used both hands to lift his drooping head, adjusted it straight, then held it firmly in place with one hand. "Because you are wasteful," Jack said, his black eyes staring straight into mine. "You have bones, flesh, skin, biological masterpieces. But when you die, what do? Bury it in the ground. Feed it to the maggots. Such a waste of materials." He walked toward the sewing machine. "I give them a second chance. I mend them. I make them better, more durable. No more sickness, no more pain. Just eternal existence." Jack sat down on the sewing machine chair. The action was so bizarre that I couldn't pull the trigger. A stuffed monster, calmly sitting at a sewing machine. He picked up the strip of my father's skin, placing it under the presser foot. "You know, Elias," Jack said while starting to pump the treadle. Thump, thump, thump. The flywheel spun. The needle began to stab down. Plop, 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 plop. This body of Jack's. It's old. I've been using it for 5 years to get around. The wooden joints are worn. The cotton inside is moldy. I need a new coat. He looked at me, and this time, his ripped open mouth didn't smile. It opened into a perfectly round hole. "And you are the perfect candidate." Clang. A loud sound came from the shed ceiling. I looked up. In the darkness of the beams, I saw flickering specks of light. Not fireflies. They were eyes. Dozens of pairs of eyes. The scarecrows I had seen in the cornfield. They had crawled in here somehow. They were clinging to the ceiling like giant geckos. Their long, thin limbs, made of broomsticks and plastic pipes, were wrapped in layers of old farmer clothes. But their hands were scythe blades and iron hooks. Jack continued sewing, the machine noise rumbling to the rhythm of my frantic heartbeat. "Get him," Jack ordered softly, without lifting his head. "But be careful with the skin. Don't tear it." The scarecrows on the ceiling simultaneously let go. Thump, thump, thump. They fell to the floor around me, forming a closed circle. The smell of damp straw and mold billowed up strongly. I looked at the nearest one. It was wearing an old floral dress of a woman, probably the neighbor, Mrs. Miller, who went missing last year. Its head was a burlap sack, but where the mouth should have been, a set of white porcelain dentures was crudely stitched onto the fabric. The teeth chattered together. Clack, clack, clack. I had no escape route. The main door was locked. The window was too high. There was only one way out. The cellar door in the corner of the shed, the place my father used to store potatoes and take shelter from tornadoes. It was right under the old tractor, about 5 meters away from me. But to get there, I had to run past the scarecrows and... Jack. Jack seemed to read my mind. He stopped the sewing machine. "The cellar?" He tilted his head. "A live burial vault. That's a good idea." He stood up, carrying a pair of huge tailor's shears, the blades a foot long, gleaming. "Let's see how fast you run," Jack said, then violently cut the air. Clang! The scarecrows lunged. I fired the gun. The bullet hit the head of the floral dress scarecrow, scattering straw and cotton wool. But it didn't fall. It merely staggered, then lunged again, its hooked iron fingers swinging. I swung the gun butt and hit its face hard, feeling like I was hitting a hard sandbag. I squeezed past, running frantically toward the tractor. A cold hand grabbed my ankle. I fell flat onto the oily floor. I turned back. Another scarecrow, missing a leg, was crawling on the floor, clamping my foot with its bony hand. Real bone, wired to a wooden arm. "Let go of me!" I yelled, kicking its face hard with my remaining boot. Crack. The cheekbone of the skull inside the sack shattered. It released its grip. I scrambled up, lunging for the cellar hatch. I yanked the iron ring. The heavy hatch flipped open, revealing a pitch-black space and a smell of damp earth. "Elias!" Jack's voice boomed right behind me, the whistling sound of the shears slicing the air. I jumped down into the cellar. Thud. The shears embedded themselves into the wooden edge of the hatch, right where my hand had been clinging. If I had been a fraction of a second slower, it would have pinned my hand to the floor. I fell freely into the darkness, tumbling down the rotten wooden steps. Thump. I landed with a painful jolt. Above, The light from the hatch was obscured by dark shadows. Jack's face appeared in the square frame, looking down at me. "Hide well, Elias," Jack called down. "I like hide and seek, it makes the meat firmer." Then he slammed the hatch shut. Bang! The sound of the latch being secured from outside. Squeak, clack. Total darkness enveloped me. I was underground. But I was not alone. In the dense darkness, I heard breathing. Not one person, but many people. Wheezing, weak, intermittent breaths. I trembled as I flicked open the Zippo lighter for the last time. The lighter fuel was nearly empty, the flame flickering like a will-o'-the-wisp. The faint light illuminated the cellar, and I realized this was not a potato cellar. This was the waiting room. Along the damp earthen walls, there were cocoons. Cocoons made of spider silk and black threads, hanging suspended, and inside those cocoons were living people, or what was left of them. They were tightly wrapped, only their faces exposed. Their skin was pale, eyes wide with terror, but unable to blink because their eyelids had been cut off. Their mouths were sewn shut with twine, and in the corner of the cellar, one of them was the town sheriff, the man who went missing last week. He looked at me, his pupils darting frantically, trying to scream through the crisscrossing stitches on his mouth. I had fallen into the Nightmare Weaver's raw material stockpile. The third smile was not on Jack's mouth. His forehead cracked open along a hidden seam down his nasal bridge, revealing a tiny, wrinkled, wet face enthroned inside the hollow skull. The air in the cellar was thick with the smell of death. The flame from my Zippo flickered, alternating between bright and dim, casting grotesque, dancing shadows onto the human cocoons hanging along the walls. Sheriff Miller, or the cocoon with his face, was still staring at me. His eyeballs darted frantically, begging for release or a quick death. From the corners of his sewn-shut mouth, foam bubbled out, seeping through the threads, dripping onto his stained uniform shirt. I backed away, my back hitting the cold earthen wall. I was trapped between the living victims and the monster guarding the exit above. Suddenly, the cellar latch above opened again. Clack. I quickly extinguished the lighter, shrinking into the darkness behind a pile of rotten wooden crates. The hatch flipped open. Cold moonlight poured in, forming a dim pillar of light straight into the middle of the cellar. Jack didn't jump down, nor did he climb down the ladder. He dropped down, a free fall. His body slammed hard onto the dirt floor. Thud. A dull sound, without the noise of breaking bones, just like a sack of potatoes hitting the floor. He lay face down, motionless for about 3 seconds. Then, his limbs began to writhe. His joints rotated counterclockwise, crack, 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 setting his body upright in a physically impossible way. His head was still flopped to one side from my earlier bullet, dangling like a broken clock pendulum. Elias. The voice emanating from that body had now completely changed. It was no longer an imitation of Jack's voice. It was a wet, squelching sound, like someone chewing raw meat while speaking. "Don't hide anymore. This shell is itchy." Jack stepped into the dim light. I held my breath, my hand tightly gripping the old dagger I had just found on top of the wooden crate, a rusty knife used for cutting rope. Jack's body began to convulse violently. It wasn't an epileptic fit. It was an uprising from within. His 2 hands raised, black fingernails clawing at his chest. Slash! Slash! He tore open his shirt, then raked straight at his flesh. Large patches of chest skin peeled off easily, exposing the moldy cotton wool and the oak stick rib cage underneath. Too tight. Jack's ripped open mouth moved, but the sound resonated from above his head. Too tight. And then, the third smile appeared. It began from his hairline, right in the middle of Jack's forehead. A thin black thread I had never noticed before suddenly became taut. Snap, snap, snap. Each stitch broke, scattering small particles of dust. Jack's forehead skin split in 2. The crack ran down his nasal bridge, through his philtrum, down to his chin, perfectly dividing his face into 2 halves. The 2 halves of the face pulled apart like cabinet doors. I covered my mouth to stifle the panicked scream rising in my throat. Inside that hollow head, there was no brain, no blood vessels. Sitting enthroned on the platform of the cervical vertebrae, made of a rusty iron rod, was a thing. It was small, only the size of a grapefruit. It had the shape of a human face, but ancient, wrinkled so much that the wrinkles stacked up like the bark of an old oak tree. Its skin was purplish black, wet, covered in mucus. It had no nose, only 2 tiny breathing holes. Its eyes were tiny, burning red like 2 hot coals, gleaming in their deep sockets, and it was smiling at me. A tiny mouth full of sharp needles instead of teeth. This was the Nightmare Weaver. The puppet master, the brain of the atrocity. Found you, the tiny face hissed. Its voice was high-pitched, jarring like fingernails scraping a blackboard. Immediately, Jack's corpse collapsed. It didn't fall to the ground. It exploded from within. Boom. Flesh, cotton wool, and wooden frames scattered everywhere. From the wreckage, the true form of the monster emerged. It wasn't human-shaped. It resembled a giant spider. But its legs weren't spider legs. They were human arms. 8, 10, or 12 naked human arms, of all sizes, all skin tones, sprouted from a central body that was swollen like a drum. There were muscular men's arms, pale women's arms, and even tiny children's arms. All the arms were stitched and connected to the torso with brutal threads, oozing yellow fluid. They moved independently, writhing, fingers continuously flexing and extending as if searching for something to grasp. The tiny purplish-black head sat on top of that chaotic mass of flesh, supported by a long neck made of the spine of a snake or some reptile. Clink. Clink. The monster moved toward me on its human hand legs. The hands pressed against the ground, fingers digging into the clay, dragging the heavy torso forward. Its movement sound was the thud, thud, thud of flesh hitting the ground and the crack, crack of joints. Your skin, the monster said, its head swaying. Its 2 front arms raised, each holding a long needle connected to a black thread spooling out from its abdomen. I will weave it into the most beautiful coat. It lunged. Its speed was absurdly fast. I screamed, swinging the dagger wildly into the air. Thud. The knife struck an arm reaching out. The blade cut deep into the muscle, but no red blood flowed out, only a foul yellow fluid splashed onto my face. The monster shrieked, a jarring sound. The injured arm convulsed and then slumped, but immediately, 2 other arms from behind rose to replace it. A cold hand clamped tightly onto my ankle. The grip was as strong as an iron vise. Got you, it hissed. It violently dragged me down. I was pulled roughly across the dirt floor, heading toward its swollen abdomen, where I saw dozens of needles bobbing like the teeth of a shark. I kicked my other foot hard into the monster's face. The sole of my boot slammed directly into that tiny, wrinkled face. Smack. It screamed in pain, letting go of my leg. Its purplish face was crushed on one side, black fluid streaming out. I scrambled up, frantically looking for an escape. The stairs leading to the cellar hatch were blocked by Jack's shattered corpse. I couldn't go that way. I looked around in desperation. In the deepest corner of the cellar, behind the human cocoons, I felt a faint breeze, making the spider silk sway. There was a hole. A narrow dirt tunnel, just wide enough for one person to crawl through, pitch black and deep. Perhaps this was the tunnel the scarecrows had used to transport the victims in here without going through the main door. Sorry, Sheriff, I whispered to Miller's cocoon as I squeezed past him. The monster had recovered from the kick. It was turning around, dozens of arms raking the ground, creating a cloud of dust. You won't escape. I'll stitch you to the wall. I'll make you part of the nest. I plunged headfirst into the dirt tunnel. It was incredibly cramped. The smell of damp earth assaulted my nose. Tree roots poked my face and hands. I had to use my elbows and knees to worm my way through, like a worm trying to escape a hoe. Behind me, I heard a rustle. Rustle. It was chasing me, and it was faster than me, because it had more hands. Elias. The whisper echoed in the narrow tunnel, sounding as if it was right next to my ear. Do you know what it feels like when the needle pierces the eye? It's so cool. I gritted my teeth, crawling faster, ignoring the sharp rocks cutting my clothes and skin. Suddenly, a hand from behind grabbed my ankle again. This time, it didn't pull. It held tight, and I felt a sharp, agonizing stab in my ankle. Thud. It had just plunged a needle into my leg. I screamed, kicking wildly. The black thread tightened. It was stitching my leg to a tree root on the side of the tunnel. I pulled out the dagger, twisting my body awkwardly, striking hard at the empty space behind. The blade severed the thread. Snap! I was free. I kicked hard at the hand, reaching out from the darkness, feeling the crunch of fingers breaking under my boot sole. I continued to crawl, crawling for my life. Ahead, I saw faint light. Moonlight. That was the exit. It led out into the cornfield. I crawled to the mouth of the hole, using all my strength to push myself out. I tumbled onto the ground, rolling over dry stalks. The fresh night air filled my lungs, sweet but cold. I was in the middle of the cornfield. The corn stalks, taller than a man, surrounded me, rustling in the wind like 1,000 whispers. I scrambled to my feet, my leg throbbing from the needle wound. But before I could regain my composure, the Nightmare Weaver shot out of the hole I had just escaped from like a bullet. It landed 10 meters away from me, standing on its 12 human arms, its tiny purplish head raised high, observing me. And then, it arched its neck and let out a strange sound. Not a roar, but a continuous click, click, click. In response, from all across the vast cornfield, hundreds of similar sounds echoed. Click, click, click. The cornstalks began to shake. The scarecrows were awakening. This entire field was a living trap. I ran into the cornfield, seeking shelter among the tall stalks. But I realized the straw scarecrows I had set up last month now all had extra human limbs, and they were moving against the wind. The cornfield was once my pride. The genetically modified corn stalks were over 2 meters tall, their leaves sharp as razors, their stalks plump and full of sap. But tonight, under the pale moonlight and the control of the Nightmare Weaver, it turned into a maze of death. The click, click, click echoed everywhere, reverberating from all directions. It wasn't the sound of insects, it was a signal, the sound of bones knocking together. I ran wildly through the corn rows. The corn leaves whipped my face and hands, leaving stinging scratches. Sweat mixed with blood and dirt streamed down my eyes, blurring my already limited vision. "Run, little mouse!" The monster's hiss echoed from behind, sounding distant yet very close. It was playing. It knew I couldn't escape. I turned sharply left, trying to lose it by running in a zigzag pattern. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest burning as if I had inhaled hot coals. Suddenly, I stopped short. Blocking the narrow path between 2 corn rows was a massive dark shape. A scarecrow. It was the one I called Old Man Joe, wearing a threadbare red flannel shirt and a wide-brimmed straw hat. It was hanging on a wooden cross stake. But that stake was no longer planted in the ground. It had been pulled up. The scarecrow was standing on 2 feet, but they weren't human feet, nor wooden feet. They were 2 rusty shovels tied to the lower part of the wooden stake with barbed wire. It moved toward me. Clank, clank, the sound of the 2 shovels hitting the pebbles, and its 2 outstretched arms. My God. The sleeve of the flannel shirt was torn, revealing 2 real human arms. One arm was pale, swollen with water. The other arm was black, shriveled like a mummy's. They were nailed directly to the horizontal wooden bar, but the fingers still flexed and extended flexibly, eager to strangle someone. Its burlap sack head snapped 180 degrees to look at me. 2 lines of red thread sewn in place of eyes glowed under the moonlight. "You." I backed away. The scarecrow lunged. It didn't run, it jumped. Its 2 shovel feet struck the ground for momentum, propelling its heavy body forward with terrifying inertia. I rolled to the side, plunging through the dense corn rows to evade it. Whoosh! One of the scarecrow's arms slammed hard into the corn stalk where I had just been standing. The arm was hard as cold iron, shattering 3 corn stalks as thick as a man's wrist. I didn't dare look back. I kept running. But the more I ran, the more I realized the desperation of the situation. This field didn't just have 1 scarecrow. All around me, other dark shapes were separating from the wooden stakes. Some were crawling on all 4s, their limbs made of pickaxes. Some were slithering along, using long strips of large intestine wrapped around the stalks. Some were dangling from the tall corn stalks, leaping from one stalk to another like mutant apes. A whole legion of straw and flesh. A hellish harvest. Thud. My foot caught on something. I fell face down onto the ground. I scrambled to stand up, only to realize my ankle was tightly wrapped. Not a vine, it was fishing line. Super strong, transparent fishing line, strung tightly between the corn stalks, about 20 centimeters above the ground. I pulled out the dagger, frantically cutting the line, but just as I severed it, snap, a small bell jingled somewhere nearby. Jingle, jingle. It was an alarm trap. Immediately, from the corn stalks on the left, something lunged out and pinned me to the ground. A strong stench of foul-smelling old garbage hit my face. It was a female scarecrow. It was dressed in a tattered, yellowed wedding dress. Beneath the torn veil was the skull of a coyote, its eye sockets hollow. It pressed down on my chest. Its weight was not like straw, but heavy as a sack of cement. I realized that inside the wedding dress was not straw, but dirt. It was stuffed full of damp clay. Die! Die! A voice shrieked from inside the coyote skull. It wasn't its voice, but the sound of a broken music box stuffed into its throat, playing back a distorted recording. Its two hands, the bony hands of an old person, clamped tightly around my neck. I choked. Its sharp fingernails dug deep into the skin of my neck, and blood began to flow. My vision blurred. Black spots started dancing. I struggled desperately. My hand groped on the ground, searching for anything to use as a weapon. My fingers touched a rock the size of my fist, with a sharp edge. I gripped the rock, using all my strength to slam it against the side of the coyote skull. Clop. The skull cracked, but it still didn't let go. I hit it a second time, a third time. Crack! The skull shattered. The music box inside fell out, falling silent. Its arm went limp. I pushed the heavy, dirt-filled corpse aside, coughing violently, gulping air. My throat was raw, as if burned by fire. Before I could recover, the ground shook. Thump, thump, thump. The Nightmare Weaver had arrived. It was gliding along the tops of the corn stalks. Its 12 arms clung to the stalks, moving swiftly like a water strider on a lake surface. It looked down at me from above, its tiny purplish head grinning triumphantly. "You broke my toy," it said, its voice reproachful but filled with cruel pleasure. "Now you must replace it." It spat out a white thread from its mouth. The thread flew down, sticking fast to my left shoulder. I tugged hard, but the thread was tough, as rubber and sticky as superglue. It gave its head a slight jerk. My body was yanked off the ground, suspended in midair. "No!" I screamed, slashing the knife at the thread. But the dull knife couldn't cut it immediately. I was pulled higher, slicing through the sharp corn leaves, facing the monster directly. The distance was only a few meters. I could clearly see every wrinkle on that disgusting tiny face, see the droplets of saliva dripping from its mouth full of sharp needles. "Don't be afraid," it whispered. "I will take out all your bones before stuffing you. It won't hurt. Just be a little cold." Its nearest hand reached out, trying to grab my head. In that moment of life and death, my hand touched my back pocket. The Zippo lighter. Was it out of fuel? No. It was still flickering in the cellar earlier. Perhaps there was one last bit of gas left. But what good would a lighter do against this monster? Its skin was thick, wet. A small fire couldn't do anything. Unless... I looked down at the cornfield beneath my feet. This summer had seen a record drought. Although the corn stalks were tall, their leaves were brittle and dry. And more importantly, to combat pests, I had sprayed a layer of mineral oil over the entire field last week. The entire field was a giant powder keg, and I was dangling right above the fuse. "You want me?" I shouted, drawing its attention. "Come and get me." I raised my left hand to ward off the blow, allowing the monster's hand to grab my bicep. Its claws dug into my flesh, a pain that pierced the sky. But my right hand had pulled out the Zippo. I didn't light it immediately. I threw the dagger hard at its face. Thud. The knife plunged into one of its red eyes. It shrieked, a mournful, jarring sound that felt like my eardrums were about to burst. The thread clinging to my shoulder slackened from the pain. I fell, but before I hit the ground, I flipped open the Zippo. Clack. The flint wheel spun. Sparks flew. It didn't light. "Motherfucker!" I cursed, falling into the dry corn leaves. I struck it a second time. Clack. Foot. The flame erupted, small, faint. I used it to ignite the dry corn leaves right under my feet, where a puddle of mineral oil still lingered on the husk. Boom. Not the sound of an explosion, but the roar of a fire dragon. The fire caught the mineral oil, erupting violently instantly. It spread as fast as lightning through the dry corn rows. In an instant, a brilliant orange wall of fire stood up between me and the monster above. The heat scorching my face singed my eyebrows and sideburns. The Nightmare Weaver was high above, right in the column of rising hot air. Fire was its enemy. Fire burned the spider silk. Fire melted wax and fat. Fire turned the dry corpses to ashes. Hot. Too hot. The monster screamed, its voice distorted, becoming pitiful. Its 12 arms flailed wildly, trying to cling to the cornstalks that were engulfed in flames. But the burning cornstalks snapped and collapsed loudly, making it lose its foothold. It fell straight into the raging sea of fire below. I didn't stay to watch it die. I turned and ran. This time, I wasn't running from a monster. I was racing against death. The fire was spreading in all directions, fanned by the night wind, chasing close at my heels. The sizzling sound of the cornstalks popping like firecrackers. The roar of the fire wind drowned out all other noises. Around me, the scarecrows were on fire. They ran wildly like living torches, crashing into each other, falling, screaming with silent voices. One lunged at me, entirely engulfed in flames, but I kicked it down and kept running. Black smoke billowed up, obscuring the moonlight. I coughed violently, my eyes burning so much I couldn't keep them open. I only knew to run toward the faint car headlights in the distance, the highway. My lungs were about to burst. My legs were numb from pain and exhaustion. Behind me, from the red sea of fire, a massive dark silhouette rose up. It was burning. The Nightmare Weaver, its whole body ablaze like a demon stepping out of hellfire, was still trying to crawl after me. Its burnt arms raked the scorched earth. Its tiny head, now stripped of skin, a black skull with bared teeth. But it slowed down. The joints being incinerated by the fire began to detach. Arms fell off one by one. I lunged through the rotten wooden fence, tumbling into the drainage ditch by the highway shoulder. The cold mud water in the ditch saved my burning skin. I lay there, panting, looking up at the sky, red from the giant fire that was consuming the farm, consuming the house, consuming the past. The sound of fire truck sirens wailed in the distance. It was over. I closed my eyes, letting the soothing darkness pull me away. But just before I passed out, I heard one last sound emanating from the fire, echoing through the air, overriding the roar of the flames. Not a scream. It was the clanking of metal, clack, clack, and a voice whispered in my head, clear as if it were lying right next to me in the ditch. The final stitch is always the hardest stitch, Elias. The police said I was hallucinating due to gas poisoning, and what I saw were just side effects of painkillers, but whenever the weather turns cold, the long scar on the back of my neck aches, and I hear the sound of thread tearing right beneath my skin. Omaha Memorial Hospital smelled strongly of disinfectant and old lilies, a blinding white color. I woke up after 3 days in a coma. The doctor said I was lucky. A large fire had burned down the entire 500-acre Vance family farm. The police found me unconscious in the ditch by the highway, with second-degree burns all over my body and severe dehydration. "You inhaled too much smoke and methane gas," the inspector told me while taking my statement, tapping his hand rhythmically on my medical file. "It could be from a slow gas leak in the cellar. It causes extremely strong hallucinations. Paranoia. Persecutory delusion." "What about Jack?" I asked, my voice hoarse from smoke damage to my vocal cords. "I saw Jack. And the bodies. In the cellar." The inspector sighed, looking at me with pity, the look reserved for the insane. "We found the remains of Jack Miller in the family plot. He's still there, Elias. The coffin lid was damaged by the heat of the fire, but the bones were untouched. No one grave robbed. And in the cellar, we only found old potato sacks and a few burnt scarecrows. No other bodies." I was silent. Hallucinations. The claw marks on my chest? You clawed yourself in a panic while escaping the fire. The wound on my ankle? You tripped on a tree root. The long scar on the back of my neck. The surgeon said a sharp piece of tin cut you when you fell into the ditch. The wound was quite deep, reaching down to the cervical vertebrae, and they had to use 32 stitches. Everything was explained by logic. By science. This world does not accept monsters. It only accepts unfortunate accidents and damaged brains. I was discharged 2 weeks later. I sold the burnt land to a real estate corporation for a pittance. I never went back there. I moved to a small apartment in downtown Chicago, a place that is always noisy, where the streetlights never go out, and most importantly, a place with no cornfields. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least, I tried to play the role of a normal person. But some things never left me. I couldn't look at cloth dolls in a toy store. I vomited when I saw someone holding a needle and thread, and I was afraid of the mirror. 6 months passed. Winter descended upon Chicago with freezing winds from Lake Michigan, whistling through the cracks in the apartment window just like the wind in Nebraska that night. Tonight, the scar on the back of my neck itched insanely. It wasn't the kind of itch from new skin forming. It was deep inside, in the bone marrow. It felt like something was crawling along my spine. I went into the bathroom, turning the light on bright. I stood in front of the mirror, my hand trembling as I held a small hand mirror to look at the back of my neck. The long scar, pale pink, ran from my hairline down to my neck. The doctors did a good job. The stitches were neat, continuous. But wait, I squinted, looking closely at the reflection in the mirror. Right in the middle of the scar, there was a tiny black dot. It looked like a blackhead, or an ingrown hair. I brought my hand up to touch it. It was hard and sharp. I used my thumb and index finger, pinching the blackhead tightly. I pulled. Sting. A jolt of pain shot down my spine to my heels, almost making me collapse. But along with the pain came a strange sense of satisfaction, as if a long-suppressed pressure was being released. I continued to pull. A black thread began to emerge from my skin. It wasn't self-dissolving surgical thread. It was tough, coarse, and smelled of damp earth. I pulled out 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters. The thread seemed endless, and as I pulled it out, I felt empty inside my neck, as if the thread wasn't just under the skin, but it was binding my muscles, tendons, and even my esophagus together. Cook. My head suddenly jerked forward. My neck lost control. I frantically let go of the thread. In the mirror, I saw my face pale, but the horrifying thing was my shadow on the wall. I was standing still, but my shadow on the white-tiled wall behind me was moving. The shadow raised its hand, making a shush gesture, index finger placed on its lips, and then a voice spoke. Not from outside, not from inside my head. It spoke from my own throat, but I hadn't moved my lips. "Don't take it out, Elias." The voice was deep, distorted, exactly like Jack's voice that night. "That is the master stitch. If you take it out, you will fall apart." I looked in the mirror. My mouth was tightly shut, but I saw the skin of my throat moving, pulsating as if a tiny face was hiding right under the skin of my Adam's apple. I hadn't escaped. I had never escaped. That night, in the cellar, when I thought I had run away, maybe that's when it caught me. It didn't need to kill me. It needed a new home, a younger, healthier shell, and most importantly, a shell that believed it was still human. My hand, my right hand, automatically raised, grabbing the beard trimmer scissors from the shelf above the mirror. I tried to stop it with my willpower, but it was useless. That arm was no longer obeying me. It brought the scissors up, cutting the black thread sticking out from the back of my neck. Snap. Afterward, my hand put the scissors down, smoothed the hair at the back of my neck, and adjusted my shirt collar. In the mirror, my face slowly spread into a smile I had no desire to make. The corners of my mouth were pulled up mechanically, revealing white teeth. My eyes in the mirror stared at me, the last remaining consciousness screaming in despair. "Chicago winter is truly cold," my mouth said, the voice artificially cheerful. "But it's okay. This skin is warm." The bathroom light flickered off. In the darkness, I heard the click, click, click coming from my own chest, and I knew the nightmare had just begun. You have just listened to the story of Elias and the seamster. But check yourself. Your appendectomy scar from last year, or the stitches on your knee from childhood, has it truly healed? Or does it sometimes itch, as if someone is pulling strings from within? If you feel a shiver, click subscribe and turn on notifications, because if you don't, tonight the Nightmare Weaver might visit to fix the flaws on your body. Don't let him see that you are lonely.